So, about a half a year ago, I was out for a walk in the morning and passed by some guy, just said, "Good morning, how are you doing?" And he gave me this very uncomfortable look, like maybe I was going to do something to hurt him, or maybe I was going to call the cops on him, or something like that. And I didn't quite understand why. It didn't really make sense. And then it occurred to me shortly after he left, he was black, I'm white. There's all this talk on TV about how much racial conflict there is going on in the world, and I said I need to do something about this, so I wanted to make this video. It's going to be long. I've created a little like a pilot script here of just bullet points. I'm going to try not to repeat myself except where I feel that it's necessary to clearly communicate myself. So here we go. So the first thing is that racism is very much a hot topic in the country today. If you turn on TV and you look at the news, if you go on social media, there are people who are continuously talking about it. You will find in the world that there are truly ill-intentioned people, and these ill-intentioned people cause upsets on purpose. And one of the things that people are causing upsets about on purpose is racism. There's actually a considerable more confusion about this field than really needs to exist. When a person experiences some sort of traumatic experience in their life, either some sort of physical trauma like an injury or an illness, some kind of emotional trauma like a painful or upsetting loss or some difficult problem, it has an effect on the mind that can turn the person into kind of a stimulus response machine. You've heard about Pavlov's classical conditioning, where he would ring the bell and then feed the dog and they would salivate. There's a part of the story that you maybe didn't know, which is he would ring the bell and then hit the dog with a stick. That's what drove the actual classical conditioning in place. What we have is, rather than somebody going around beating us with sticks, you have people sharing all this shocking, upsetting information either on the news or social media as that stick. They use an emotional stick rather than a physical one. There is a tremendous amount of harmful false information that is spread on purpose, but it's important to understand the distinction. In society, you have genuinely evil people, which only comprise 20%. The truly evil are 2.5%. The remaining 80% of us want to do well. I want you to do well, you want me to do well. We were tricked into thinking that we're enemies by these insane 20%, and especially the insane 2.5%. They're not necessarily wealthy or poor. They're not necessarily Republican or Democrat. They're not even necessarily white or black. It is purely a question of good and evil. They have no particular group that they are part of other than the fact that they are evil. A realization that I had several years ago that really updated my understanding of the world is that if you look at all conflicts that people have ever had, the bad guys were always convinced that they were actually the good guys. There is the concept that, I feel that I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy, everything I do is in the name of justice, everything that you do is in the name of evil, so I can do whatever I want because it's all justice, and no matter what kind of atrocity I inflict on you, it's okay. Because of this, we get people who want to help make the world a better place and want to fight back against racism, and so they wind up taking extreme measures that are more destructive than good. So the first thing that I really want to get into in terms of stripping away these false concepts is actually going over some basic definitions. You would think that it's maybe silly or unnecessary to go over commonly used English words, but consider the word as. If I asked you, what does as mean, could you tell me with certainty right off the top of your head? So maybe there's some more that could be known about other commonly used words. We're going to start with race. We're not even actually going to start with racism. We're just going to find out what is a race. A group of people considered to be distinct on the basis of physical characteristics. Okay, that's simple enough. Prejudice. And adverse, that means negative, bad, not positive, judgment or opinion formed unfairly or before one knows the facts. So you just come up with a negative opinion right off the bat before you even know what's going on. We have the word bias. A preference for or hostile feeling against a person or thing that interferes with impartial judgment. So you already feel a certain way ahead about, either positively or negatively, that doesn't allow you to look at something the way it actually is. You've already gone in ahead of time with an opinion about the way it really is, whether it is or isn't. Discriminate. To show preference or prejudice. So when you discriminate against somebody, you're making a decision ahead of time about the way something is, and you are being hostile or negative to it just because of your feelings without actually inspecting it for the way that it is. Now finally we get into the word racism. The belief that race accounts for differences in human character or ability, and that a particular race is superior to others. It also says discrimination or prejudice based on race. Now, we're going to get into some other words that might not necessarily seem appropriate, but it ties into some of the newer false concepts related to racism. We're going to look up system. A group of elements or parts that interact to form a complex whole. And systemic, of or relating to an entire system. So system and systemic, how something is structured, all of the different parts that come together to create a unified whole. And systemic is the way that it functions inherently in its design. Then we're going to go back around, interestingly enough, to the word racist. And why we're looking up racist as separate than racism is because there are two different ways to use the word. You can use it as an adjective, which means that you are describing some kind of action or activity or attitude, and you can use it as a noun, which is a particular kind of person. So it doesn't have it clearly defined here in the dictionary. It just says the adjective would be racist. So when you have an attitude which is racist, it would be one that shows discrimination against a person or a group based entirely on ideas that you made ahead of time. A person who is a racist is a person who predominantly has these kinds of attitudes. Now, there are some new ideas that were generated within the last 10, 20 years about racism, which are actually contradictory and therefore illogical. And if they are contradictory and illogical, then they are therefore false. People have accepted these ideas, they thought they were true, they believed them, and now they are trying to use these ideas to make the world a better place. But if you were trying to fix a sink, and you didn't understand how plumbing worked, you would only be able to either do no good trying to fix the sink or actually cause damage or harm, right? If you were trying to repair some part of a car and you didn't understand how that was put together and how all the different parts of it worked together, you would either be able to do no good or you would cause harm. The same is also true for the mind and for the spirit. When you don't understand how the mind and the spirit work, and you go into a situation and you try to fix it, if you do have any success, it is because of luck. It's because you accidentally did the right thing without understanding why. So we're going to go through some of these basic concepts and show exactly why they are false so that you can throw them out and stop thinking with them. So we have a phrase the United States of America is systemically racist. So we're going to take each word of this sentence, the, a single specific thing being referred to, united, brought together as a whole, states, individual governing bodies, of means belonging to a particular geographic region, America is the North American continent, is means exists in a particular way, systemically means inherently in the structure of how it is, racist means having a prejudice against skin colors. The United States of America is systemically racist. This is a core concept that a lot of people hold these days. So what exactly is the United States of America? We can't say that it's the land, because this was here before the United States of America existed, and if hypothetically at some point in the future the country ceases to exist, the land will still be here under some other nationality. We can't say that it's the buildings or the man-made objects that exist here, because things that exist here in the United States of America were made in other countries, or things that are made in America get sent to other countries. That doesn't necessarily mean that this book is China, and this book is Thailand, and this shirt is Venezuela. That's not it either. So what we're actually looking at when we talk about the United States of America is the people who make up the country. If you look at me, Ben Reed, I am a combination of all of the individually alive cells in my body. All of them together equals me. All of us added together equals the United States of America. So when you say that the United States of America is systemically racist, that means that you are talking about every individual person who lives in this country. But now we get hit with this interesting double whammy. There is no such thing as reverse racism. This is another core concept that people have been carrying around. So what that means is I can be racist to a black person, but a black person cannot be racist to me. This concept is based entirely on skin color, so it is in itself a form of prejudice. If you look at reverse, all reverse means is going back the other direction. So if I'm trying to be racist to them, if they are discriminating against me, if they are showing prejudice or bias against me based on my skin color, that fits the definition of racism. So to say reverse racism would be some illogical concept that doesn't even make sense. Additionally, when we talk about America being systemically racist, and we say that black people can't be racist towards Americans, if we try to put these two concepts together logically, that means that black people can't be Americans. If they can't be racist and America is systemically racist, they can't be Americans. Hispanics, Asians, Native Americans, if these people can only be racist towards, but they can't send out racism, they can't be racist to other people, but the United States of America is systemically racist, then they can't logically be Americans. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is it doesn't make any sense, therefore it's obviously not true. You can reject that whole body of knowledge. It was created by some ill-intentioned person who was trying to create confusion. Now, we're going to go into another definition, the word reparations. The act or process of repairing or the condition of being repaired. The act or process of making amends, which means basically making up for some harmful or wrong action that you've done. One of the things that's really talked about a lot these days is the necessity for reparations for black people because of racism. The only trouble is that reparations have been paid on many separate instances. There are black-only colleges, there are black-only scholarships, there are a great many things that were designed specifically under the blanket of what was known as affirmative action back in the 50s, 60s, other things like that that were already done. The fact that these things were not well documented, well enough, right? We have Black History Month every single year. That people talk about what was done by important historical figures. This is fine, it should be celebrated, but what should also be mentioned, in addition to talks about slavery, talks about segregation, talks about these things, is the reparations that have already been done should be recorded and should be made known. When it isn't, it gives people the false sensation that nothing has been done. So they're told about the harm that was done to them, and then they're never told about what was done to fix it, leaving them stuck feeling like they've been harmed with nothing that has been done at all. They're in this uncaring society that's just ditched them. So again, taking this idea of reparations and taking it a stretch further than that, are you the same person that you were last year? How about 10 years ago? 20 years ago? Absolutely not. You continue to change over time. Sometimes you change more rapidly than others. You have phases in your life. Some people went through a full-blown goth phase, or they were a hippie, or they were way into Japanese animation or something else, and then they came out of it and they're no longer doing that anymore. So how would you feel if somebody that you knew refused to forgive you for something that you did last year, or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100? How about 250 years ago? So if that person hangs on to that resentment for that long, is that really healthy or rational for that person to hang on to that resentment? Yet, we blame people who were born in the last 10, 20, 30, 70 years for an industry that was ended over 100 years ago, long before they were born. Additionally, if we want to look at the full historical context, it was a white president who made the end for slavery here in the United States of America. There were white members of Congress who voted to ratify the various amendments that allowed for black people to be full citizens and to be allowed to vote. White people ran the Underground Railroad. There was even the Civil War itself. We kicked our own ass. If you take just the deaths in the Civil War alone, more Americans died, not more people, but more Americans died in the Civil War than in all of the later wars combined. So how can we be systemically racist if so many white people, even during the days of slavery, fought so hard against it? Again, it's not logically consistent, therefore it's false, therefore reject it and stop thinking that way. Do you see what I mean? When I was in high school, I learned an important lesson about punishing people. I felt at the time that high schoolers had absolutely no business having sex because of the fact that there could be accidental pregnancies that they have no idea how to handle, right? And I still feel that even up to graduation is probably too early. I wouldn't go punishing anybody for it these days, but I ran into a situation while I was still a high schooler. I dated a girl for a while who was itching to have sex with me, and I felt it was wrong, so I declined. And I felt that it was wrong for me, and I felt that it was wrong for her. We wound up breaking up. Within a couple of weeks, she went and had sex with some other guy. Now, I wasn't offended about the fact that she went and had sex with some other guy because, you know, we amicably ended the relationship and there were no hard feelings. However, she had violated my personal moral code about no sex during high school, so I went and I chewed her out for 2 whole weeks. Every single day when I saw her, I royally chewed her out, and she would feel bad and cry and try to defend herself, and I just kept pounding. And after 2 weeks, I said to myself, she only did this once. She's not doing this wrong thing anymore. There is no benefit in me continuing to punish her. I should stop. She stopped. She changed her behavior. The only reason you punish somebody is so that they change their behavior. There's no point. So when we demand reparations, when we accuse people of slavery that they are not engaging in and have not engaged in for over 100 years, we gain nothing. We only stir up bitterness and resentment. Additionally, I'm trying in this video not to like turn around and say, oh, look what they did, but there is something that has to be pointed out. Which countries did the Europeans buy slaves from? Who captured those slaves? It was Africans. So I'm not trying to say the Africans should actually be blamed for slavery. I'm simply pointing out that when you pin all the blame on whites and put all of this bias and all of this prejudice in just one direction, it's illogical, it's irrational, it doesn't lead to a proper solution. Even the Egyptians back 4,000 years ago in biblical times had slavery, so why is all the blame put only on white Americans? Those thought processes should be thrown out, not rational. Then you get into another new false concept, which is the European colonizer attitude, right? White people are blamed for their European colonizer attitudes. Well, take a look at Central and South America. What do we call that region? It's called Latin America. Where does the Latin language come from? Italy. Rome specifically, which was a previous country, but you get my point. What language do they speak? Spanish. It comes from Spain. So all of Central and South America is European colonizer attitudes, but they get a completely free pass because their color of their skin is different than mine. It's based on prejudice. It's based on bias. It's not logical. Therefore, throw it out. Next subject. How would you feel if somebody came to you and constantly told you how racist everyone in the world around you was? You're discriminated against, you can't get good work, nobody likes you, you're mistreated, you get cut online, blah, 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 all because of the color of your skin. Would you feel safer? Would you feel that you were more in control of your environment? Would you feel that people around you were friendlier? Absolutely not. By constantly hammering on this concept of racism, 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 you actually make the people who are supposed to be protected feel like they are in danger even when they're not. Much more frequently than they would in an actually racist environment. Years ago, I worked as a counselor. Changing subjects again, sorry. The channel is Deep Thoughts on Random Subjects for a reason. I wrote this script for a reason. I have a lot to say. I worked as a counselor many years ago and would sit down and ask people questions that would prompt them to inspect the contents of their own mind. And sometimes when I would ask somebody a question, it was because I felt there was good reason that they would have an answer. One guy got into a habit of, if he's asking, then there's got to be an answer to the question. So I'd ask him, is there blah happening? And he would sit there for 5, 10, I think the record was 25 minutes. He would just sit there and he would think, trying his hardest to come up with an answer to the question. And then after a while, he'd finally get embarrassed and he'd say, I can't think of anything. He could have saved himself 25 minutes by just saying, no, it's not there, there's nothing, I don't see it, right? On that same basic concept, I'm gonna make a metaphor or an analogy. Imagine there's some drill sergeant who's hazing some guy that's just been recruited into the Army. And the drill sergeant takes the guy to some big empty grassy field and he says, Private, I want you to find, I lost my golf ball out in that field and I want you to find it and I want you to bring it back to me and you're not allowed to return until you find it. And this guy goes out looking, and what he doesn't know is this drill sergeant is just pranking him in some really horrible way. There is no golf ball out there, but the guy is so convinced that there is that he's going to, after making some desperate panicked sweep of the whole field, he's going to start combing through it more carefully and eventually turning over every blade of grass. And what he's going to finally wind up doing is finding the closest substitute he can, like a mushroom or a rock that's vaguely golf ball shaped and colored, and bring it back and say, I found it, because he was only given one option, which is find it, bring it here. There was no go see if it is there, and then if it is, bring it back. So when you deal with the subject of anti-racism, anti-racists operate on a very simple set of programming. Find racism, attack it. It doesn't matter if racism isn't there. Their programming is find it, attack it. And they will continue searching until they either A, find a real example of actual racism, or B, are forced, based on their programming, to dream up something that is racism and then attack that and call it racist even though it actually isn't. I'll give a very simple, clear example of this. There was some astronomer who felt that the whole field of astronomy was racist against black people, and the proof that he gave was the term black hole. Now, a black hole is called that because it is so heavy that it absorbs all of the light around it. It sponges up basically every last form of physical existence around it. It's not called the word I'm not allowed to say hole. It is called a black hole because if you look at it in a telescope, it looks black. There's nothing in that about discrimination against the color of a skin. But you see how far people have to stretch their imagination to find that golf ball that isn't in the field, and it's because of these false ideas that they've been tricked into believing are true. They're trying to fix a sink that they don't know how to fix, or worse, they were taught incorrectly how to fix it, and now they brought out the blowtorch and the sledgehammer when you don't need that, you need a wrench. So again, we have two definitions for the word racist. Some action or attitude which shows prejudice, and a person who is dominated by these concepts. I'm going to step away from this and take a look at an allied subject so that you get a fresh view away from it. Alcoholism. If a person had 1 glass of alcohol per year, they would not be an alcoholic. If they had 2 in a year, they would not be alcoholic. Even if they had 1 glass every month, they would not be an alcoholic. Right around the time you hit a glass every 2 weeks, they're entering borderline alcoholism. Once a week, you wouldn't really call them an alcoholic, but you would consider that they had a problem and they should cut back. By about the time they hit several times every single week, every few days, you can say that person is an alcoholic. But it has to be a predominant aspect of that individual's personality before they are truly an alcoholic. So if somebody posts something on Twitter in 2015 when they are a teenager, that shows some degree of discrimination or not. Maybe they point out some action somebody did, which was a valid observation of that action, but it aligns with prejudices. We now have this cancel culture attack where this person is a racist because they said one thing that may or may not have been racist once a decade ago. Not logical. Not workable. It doesn't lead to a solution. It does lead to people fighting one another and feeling victimized needlessly. This hyper-focus on the concept of racism has gone so far that people have completely divorced the concept of prejudice and bias, and now I find, and what prompted this video is anytime a person feels even just inconvenienced or mildly annoyed, they feel that this is a product of racism. Let's say I accidentally got into a car accident with somebody, or I cut somebody off in line. Maybe I was rude, maybe I was absent-minded. Let's say I cheat on a test. Are these things racist? Only if I did it out of some bias against that person's skin color. If I simply do something that is upsetting to the person and I wasn't thinking with or didn't care about their skin color, it's not racist. You get into terms like non-white and BIPOC, black, indigenous, person of color. These things are intended to empower the black community and make them feel like they're stronger. But did you realize that these are actually white supremacist terms? This is what's really fascinating. If I'm white, and if everybody else in the world is non-white, you automatically imply that I am separate from everybody else. Why would I be separate? Because I'm bigger, more powerful, stronger. Why would I be bigger, more powerful, stronger? Because they are all weaker. There's no reason to see white people as separate from every other race. If you look at the world population, you would find that the #1 ethnicity worldwide is Chinese. So why am I not non-Chinese? Why is it not black, indigenous, people of color except Chinese plus whites? Not a logical concept when you look at the big picture. Doesn't lead to a real solution. And on top of that, when you look at any one ethnic group, there is almost an uncountable number of subdivisions within that ethnic group. If I were to say Asian, I could be talking about a Korean, somebody from India, somebody from China, Mongolia, Thailand. All of these people look completely different. They have totally different attitudes, totally different cultures. So even just the term Asian could potentially be thought of as racist because it is too broad, it's too general. When you take a look at black, there's people from Kenya, Somalia, the Congo, all totally unique, distinct ethnic groups. Even when you're talking about white people, there's French, Irish, Swedish. So these blanket terms of Asian, black, white, Latin still create an unnecessary sense of division and separateness and keep us from looking at the actual thing, which is there's practically a different ethnicity per person at this point in time. I mean, we're almost to that point. There's also a very interesting thing that's been spread around recently, which is white supremacy is the biggest threat in America. Our current president said that as one of his very first statements after being inaugurated. So let me ask you a question. How many true blue, actual dedicated, hardcore white supremacists have you met in your life? I've lived in Texas almost my entire life, and the only reason I even know they exist is because of the TV, movies, and video games. I actually work with an elderly gentleman who is black, who I think he recently turned 72. And I asked him, I got curious, I said, in your entire life, how many actual verifiable, you could tell just by looking at them, white supremacists have you known? And he said less than 20. And he even went so far as to say that he has visited all 48 continental states in his life. And on top of that, he gave a brief story where he said he was selling flowers. He was selling flowers on the side of the road up in Minnesota, and there were some guys who went driving by in a car and they shouted KKK out the window. And I pointed out, you know, it's interesting you say less than 20 white supremacists. There's even the possibility that those people were just playing some dumb prank and weren't even actually white supremacists. And he said, yeah, the number could be even lower than that. There's some guy on YouTube who went to the most racist city in America, somewhere in Alabama, where the KKK has some enclave, I don't even know what they call it, and was shocked when he got there to find out that not only did everybody there that recognized him in the town from his YouTube channel greet him like some celebrity or some hero, but when he finally asked, well, what about the KKK? They said, those guys live out in the woods at the edge of town and everybody in this city hates them. So even in the most racist city in America that had the actual true blue white supremacists, they were the true actual small fringe minority with unacceptable views by actual statistics and analysis. Now let's take a look at another angle on this whole thing. Why do people have different skin colors? It's just how your body absorbs sunlight. In different parts of the world, the sunlight hits with different levels of intensity, and your body needs to be able to filter out different levels of radiation. Up in the north, they don't get that much sunlight, so they need as much as they can to get more vitamin D to help their bodies do what it needs to do up in the north. As you approach the equator, as you go further down, sunlight's more intense, so they need darker skin. It's just an evolutionary adaptation. So what then is a race? This kind of like opens up the question, what are we even actually talking about? When you have groups of people that have something in common, they cohese together and create sort of like a living organism on its own that takes on its own attitudes, its own behaviors. You have a bunch of bikers, right? Hell's Angels. They've got some sort of little group that they've created. People that enjoy tennis, people who are horror movie aficionados, right? They all have their various cultural attitudes. When two people who have the same skin color see one another, it is a natural coalescence into a group. They tend to hang out, and hanging out, they tend to adopt similar attitudes, personality traits, behaviors, whatever, right? That's what a race really is. I even heard a story one time about some Russian kid who was adopted by Chinese foster parents, never met his Russian parents, at least until he was an adult, and lived in China. And by the time he grew up, he spoke fluent Chinese and had all of the attitudes and behaviors of a Chinese person, despite having full-blooded Russian lineage. It was the way he was raised that made him Chinese, not the way that he looked. Definitely not his skin color. So now, a very fascinating concept. Do you realize that there's actually no word that means the opposite of racism in the English language? Now, I know your immediate thought, you say, oh no, there's anti-racism, but anti-racism is not the opposite of racism. Racism has to exist in order for anti-racism to have something that it antis, right? Again, taking a related but different subject, firefighters. What do? There's some fire that's out of control, that's destroying property and killing people or threatening lives. They go put it out. What do firefighters also do? They go to communities and they train people on fire safety prevention, right? Or fire prevention safety, rather. So let's say you've had some small town, a very small, easily controlled environment, and the firefighters in this town got very active in teaching everybody in the town how to prevent fires. And they did such a good job that for 3 years, there's not been a single out of control fire. What are these firefighters going to do? They have no fires to fight, so they can't be firefighters, right? So we're kind of looking at this concept of how can things improve? There's two ways things can improve. Less bad, more good. Firefighters work entirely in the realm of less bad. Anti-racists work entirely in the realm of less bad. Take even the concept of an anti-tank rifle. You have a balancing pair of opposites in war and peace, but an anti-tank rifle is not an implement of peace. You're blowing something to absolute smithereens and possibly killing people in the process. Peace would be like what my girlfriend and I are doing today. We're enjoying time at a park, we're hiking around, we're looking at water. I don't have to shoot anybody that's threatening my peace. It's just peace. If I had to shoot somebody to stay safe, that would be war. Even if they started it first and I was anti-warring their war. Do you get the distinction here? So, when a new word is created in a language, it does something very fascinating. It creates a whole system of thought processes, right? You can talk about some general experience that you've had, some object you've seen, a particular action, whatever. You can have discussions about it, but it's hard to cohese your thoughts into one specific thing. But as soon as you create a word, all of a sudden whole systems of thought processes can cling to it very easily. Take something like the web or blog. As soon as these words came out, you could have entire books written about it. You could have podcasts just about blogging. You could have people who have careers around blogging, all because that word exists. It allows the unification of thought. So I actually want to create a new word today. The word is peopleism, and it means a deliberate and intentional recognition that people are people. It's also a recognition and a celebration of the fact that we all have common similarities between us, and we also happen to have differences between us. Now, this is not a completely new concept. You see pictures of like people holding up their hand. They all have got hands with 5 fingers. Or I saw a photograph one time of somebody who had 3 different colored eggs and they cracked them open and there were yolks on the inside. That kind of gets to what I'm saying, but I'm not talking about the fact that we're all physically similar or physically different. I'm talking about we as spiritual beings are similar and we as spiritual beings are different. We all have similar fears. We all have different fears. We all have similar goals. We all have different goals. We all have the same kinds of problems, and we all have different problems. It doesn't matter on what your skin color is. It doesn't matter on how wide or narrow your nose is. Life is life for you. So we are all actually intelligences, right? That's the concept behind peopleism. If you can imagine the old text, like chat rooms that used to exist on the internet, or if you receive a text from somebody that you've never talked with before, and you're just like, it's just words on a page. How are you doing? I'm good. How are you? Great. What have you been up to lately? Blah, blah, blah. And you're just having a conversation with the person. Nothing about the conversation that you were having at that time is influenced by what they look like, by what you look like in that conversation, because you can't even see them. It's just mind to mind direct communication with no physical prejudices getting between. That's peopleism. When you can have that kind of conversation face to face with somebody and simply not care what they look like, you have become a peopleist. So, because of that basic concept, peopleism fully embraces the concept of personal responsibility. If a black person breaks into somebody's home and steals something, it's not racist to point that out. If they did it, they did it. If a white person discriminates against a black person, then it's not racist to point that out. If they are being racist, if they do something that is stereotypical for their skin color, but they did it, then they did it. They don't get any kind of false protection, and they certainly shouldn't receive any false accusation for something they didn't do. That would violate the concept of peopleism. Now, peopleism is nowhere near a new concept. It's just never before had a word that allowed it to cleanly and clearly express itself. That's why I'm creating it today. There was an exact moment in my life that I discovered peopleism for myself, but it was many years before I came up with a word. So when I was a kid, I used to get uncomfortable around people of different colors than me. That's prejudice, that's bias, that was to that extent racist. When I was in college, there was a day that I was sitting in a classroom and I suddenly noticed I was the only white guy in the classroom, and it made me very uncomfortable. Like, oh my God, I'm an outsider here, right? But I looked and I noticed the guy next to me was the only Korean, and the person next to that was the only Ethiopian in the classroom, and the person next to that was the only Indian from India. Every single person in the room was a different ethnicity, and that was the moment that I had that realization. People are people. It does not matter what they look like. And from that point forward, I've never had any preconceived ideas about a person. I've never been uncomfortable around skin colors. They're just people. Who cares what they look like? So there's one last, I think, maybe not one last, but there is another false, intentionally, maliciously false concept that I'm sure has popped up in your mind or someone else's mind by now that has to be discussed. And this is the concept of unconscious bias, right? You're racist and you don't even know it because of unconscious bias. Well, that's really cute, because I specialized when I was a counselor in unconscious thought processes, and you walked directly into my home territory. This is like somebody who's never practiced jiu-jitsu in a day going to a jiu-jitsu academy saying, I can take on every last one of you. So I'm going to hit you with a very simple hypothetical question. Can you right now, just looking at me, no other conversation of any kind, predict with total certainty, total accuracy, what my unconscious biases are for or against Oreo cookies, going for a jet ski ride, warm weather, black cats? If you can't with total certainty tell me ahead of time, just by looking at me, just by looking at the color of my skin, say what those are, then how in the hell could you possibly know what my unconscious biases are about skin color? It's the same thing. It was a totally fabricated concept created to make a situation where white people always lost and other ethnicities were always a victim, and everybody gets harmed, degraded, worn down by this concept. It is totally invalid. If I don't even know what my unconscious biases are, then you sure as hell don't. And it goes the other way around. I don't know what your unconscious biases are. It would take a considerable amount of work to uncover them. Do they exist? Yes. but we can't guarantee that any of a person's unconscious biases have to do with skin color. So it creates a situation similar to the Salem witch trials. You are a witch. We're gonna put rocks on top of you, and if we can continue stacking rocks on you forever, then you're a witch. And if you get crushed to death, well, then you weren't. Too bad, so sad. See you later, right? That's this whole unconscious bias argument. It creates a situation that cannot be won, and it always leaves non-whites feeling victimized because they feel they're in a world of unconsciously biased people who are a threat to them in some way. Now, here's another thing about the creation of the word peopleism and why it's so important. Imagine there was no word in the English language for light, bright, shiny, illumination. None of those words existed. There was only words for dark and darkness. So your view of the world would be dark and anti-dark. Get that concept. There's racism and anti-racism, dark and anti-dark. So maybe at some point in your life you've seen those searchlights that they set up at restaurants or some other place that's having a grand opening, and it shines the bright light in the sky to attract attention. Those things are brighter than the sun. But if you didn't have a word for light, you could go poke your head in the thing and practically fry your eyeballs out of your head and say, I see very little darkness in here. I can hardly see any at all, right? But then as soon as you turn away, you know, your vision has gone blanked out because you were staring at such a bright light, and you see, aha, see, there's darkness all over the place, and people weren't paying attention to this, right? I'm the real anti-darkness matter or a master here, and I figured this out, right? And you could even inspect the outside of the searchlight and see there's all kinds of darkness out here. And if you look under the mount and just the other side of the wall behind this thing, there's a ton of darkness. There's darkness all over the place here, right? And this person would miss out on the fact that this thing is emitting more light than the sun is visible from the earth. It sounds stupid, but this is what has been happening in the field of racism because we don't have a word that means the opposite. We've had the word for war, we have not had the word for peace. That's what peopleism is. It's the word for peace. So, when you're dealing with anti-racism, as I said earlier, there's two kinds of improvement. You can have less bad, you can have more good. But at some point you have to flip over from bad to good. When you're dealing with anti-racism, they are always looking only for less bad, less bad, less bad, less bad, less bad, right? You could imagine, so here we are at this beautiful park, right? If I picked up a leaf here, I could look at the details of the leaf. I could look at it more closely and see the veins. I could look at it even more closely and look at the exact structure of the veins. I could look at it under a microscope and look at the cell structure of this thing. I could go into the very most exacting detail. There could almost be a 30-minute long documentary just on this leaf. But look at the rest of this park. If you were so hyper-focused on just this, you would never see this. This right here is racism and anti-racism. This is peopleism. This is literally everything else under the sun that either does exist or has ever existed or will ever exist. This is the golf ball in the field that isn't there, but you have to find it, so you dream something up to make sure you found it. Do you see how much it harms not just the person that you were fighting, but it harms you in your own efforts to make the world a better place? You were tricked into killing yourself mentally and emotionally trying to make the world a better place. It's a dirty trick, and you should be pissed as hell. You should. I am. That's why I'm making this video. So you find peopleism is already in full-blown existence everywhere you go. Just while I've been recording this video, you can't see it because it's off camera, but there's a little trail here down by a lake, and there's people who've passed by already several times. Sometimes they look at me and they're kind of curious, sometimes they don't. Different skin colors. They're just out here enjoying their day. They don't care what each other look like. You go to a gas station, you buy a candy bar, it doesn't matter what color skin the person at the cash register was. You go to an amusement park, a restaurant, it doesn't matter. You don't care. You're just there spending time with people. That is peopleism. It's not that ethnicities are unimportant. It's that you don't get all caught up in, I have to tiptoe and walk on eggshells because I have these unconscious biases. To hell with the unconscious biases. Who gives a shit? You don't even know what they are anyway. So how do you know that you have them? Right? So, and besides that, if you talk with a person, you'll find out that most times they agree with at least one thing you say. It's not like somebody is some alien from another plane of existence just because their skin is different. They're not that different. So it's the personalities, right? It's recognizing personalities. That's what's in peopleism. And it really has nothing to do with what you look like. Interestingly enough, peopleism, fully and truly practiced in its true intent, actually also solves things like sexism, homophobia, ableism. You're just interested in the person sitting across from you, and that's it. Who cares what they look like? Now, I have gotten to the end of all of my deep thoughts, but I'm going to ask you, please share this message with other people. And I don't necessarily mean this video. If you share this video, great. If you don't, I don't care. I'm not in this for my own personal fame. I don't care if I make a penny off of this. In fact, I was even saying to Julia, the camera person, just earlier this morning, it would feel weird to make money off of this, but at the same time, there are people out there profiting off of killing people, so I don't know, I guess it wouldn't be morally wrong to profit off of making the world a better place, but it's not why I'm doing this. I just get tired of seeing people fight one another needlessly. I want you to go out there and have conversations with people and challenge them and share this concept of peopleism and get them to examine how goofy these anti-racist ideas actually are and how destructive they are to black people. Not even to whites, to black people. The simple truth is, and everybody can agree with this, the world is crazy right now. It's the craziest it's been in a long time, if not maybe ever. And what you're looking at when you look at the condition of the world is the individual condition of each individual person in it. So if the world is crazy, then that means that each individual person, and there's almost 8 billion of us, we're all suffering intensely. That's why the world sucks right now. So we need something that's going to unify us. We need something that's going to bring calm, not division and hate and fighting. Peopleism can be that unifier if you push it out there into the society hard enough that it becomes an accepted and popular concept. And when you see people being peopleist, recognize it, compliment it, encourage it, let people know how they can be more peopleist. At the end of the day, what really prompted me to make this video, more than anything else, is those people out there who are fighting the anti-racist fight are deep down inside totally honest, decent people who want the world to be a better place. But they got tricked into creating their own problem. They were tricked into seeing a world that is endlessly racist, so they can never sleep. They always have to fight because there's always more racism to fight. I created this video for them just as much as I created it for people who have known but never been able to clearly articulate how bullshit this is. I care about you and I want you to do well, and I don't want you falling for psychotic, malicious lies, and I don't think you want to either. So please, again, share this message. Thank you.